Someone, somewhere, is choosing faithfulness today, not because they are afraid of consequences, not because they are trapped, not because it is easy, but because at some point, through you, faithfulness felt worth it. They wake up in a world that constantly tells them to keep options open, to never settle, to always look for something better, newer, more exciting. Temptation is no longer hidden, it is advertised, curated, personalized, and delivered gently into their hands every day. Commitment is often mocked as naive. Loyalty is treated like an outdated concept. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, they pause. They remember you. They remember how it felt to be seen without having to perform. How it felt to be chosen without having to compete, how it felt to be valued without being consumed. You may not even know you did this. You may think you were just being yourself, consistent, present, honest in ways that didn't demand applause. But for someone who had only known chaos, unpredictability, or conditional affection, your steadiness changed something. You became proof that devotion doesn't have to feel like loss. That staying doesn't have to feel like shrinking. That choosing one person can feel expansive rather than limiting. They remember the way you listened. Not the kind of listening where someone waits for their turn to speak, but the kind where silence felt safe. Where they didn't have to simplify themselves to be understood. Where their fears weren't dismissed, and their dreams weren't laughed at. You didn't rush them. You didn't treat their vulnerability like a burden or a weapon. You held it carefully, like something alive. That alone made faithfulness feel less like a sacrifice and more like a shelter. There are moments when temptation whispers to them. It tells them that novelty is freedom, that attention is the same as connection, that excitement is the same as love. But then another memory rises, of you staying when it would have been easier to leave, of you choosing honesty over comfort, of you showing up when no one was watching. And suddenly, temptation loses its shine. Because they know what it costs to lose something real, you showed them that faithfulness isn't about perfection. You never pretended to be flawless. You had your own doubts, your own fears, your own moments of weakness. But you didn't hide behind excuses. You took responsibility. You apologized when you were wrong. You tried again when things felt heavy. That mattered more than grand gestures ever could. It taught them that commitment isn't about never breaking, it's about always being willing to repair. Someone learned through you that love doesn't have to feel like walking on eggshells. That trust can be built slowly, brick by brick. Through small, consistent actions. Through showing up when you said you would. Through keeping promises, even the inconvenient ones. Through choosing the relationship not only when it felt magical, but when it felt ordinary, quiet, and demanding. You made the ordinary sacred. There were days when you were tired. Days when you could have chosen distance instead of effort. Days when you could have protected yourself by caring less. But you didn't. You leaned in. You stayed engaged. You chose depth over escape. And without realizing it, you taught someone that faithfulness is not a cage, it's an anchor. It doesn't trap you, it keeps you from drifting into loneliness disguised as freedom. They think about how you celebrated them. Not just their achievements, but their growth. Not just their strengths, but their attempts. You noticed when they tried, even when they failed. You encouraged them without competing. You supported them without keeping score. That kind of love changes the way someone views connection forever. It makes them realize that being loyal to one heart can be richer than chasing the approval of many. Because of you, someone learned that being chosen every day feels better than being desired by everyone. That there is a quiet confidence in knowing where you belong. That intimacy deepens when it is protected, not constantly tested. That when two people choose each other repeatedly, even on days when feelings fluctuate, something strong and rare is formed. You may never hear them say this out loud. They may never trace their decision back to you. But your impact lives in the way they pause before crossing a line, in the way they protect their relationship, in the way they speak honestly instead of seeking escape. You are present in the restraint they practice, in the integrity they choose, in the boundaries they now respect. You showed them that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. That intensity isn't the same as intimacy. That chaos is not passion. Through you, they learned that peace can be exciting too, that stability can still spark wonder, that predictability can coexist with desire. You taught them that safety doesn't kill attraction, it allows it to breathe. There was something in the way you cared that didn't feel transactional. You weren't keeping a mental list of what you gave versus what you received. You weren't loving to be rewarded. You loved because it aligned with who you were. That kind of authenticity leaves a mark. It makes someone want to rise to it, to protect it, to be worthy of it. Faithfulness became a way to honor what you represented, even if you're no longer in their life. Even if time and distance have reshaped the connection, the standard you set remains. They measure new connections against the way you made them feel, safe, respected, understood. And when something threatens that standard, they hesitate. Not because they are afraid, but because they know better now. They know what real connection costs, and they know what it's worth. You reminded them that love is not found in endless options, but in intentional choice. That depth is created through repetition, through shared history, through weathering seasons together. You showed them that staying can be an act of courage. That loyalty can be a form of self-respect. That choosing one person again and again is not settling, it's committing to growth. Somewhere, someone is having a hard conversation instead of hiding. Someone is deleting a message they shouldn't reply to. Someone is choosing honesty over secrecy, patience over impulse, respect over momentary pleasure. And while they may not consciously say your name, the blueprint for that decision traces back to you. You made faithfulness feel human, not heroic. Achievable, not restrictive. Meaningful, not dull. You didn't preach it. You embodied it. And that is why it stayed with them. So if you ever wonder whether the way you love matters in a world that seems to reward the opposite, remember this: your consistency taught someone that real connection is rare. Your presence showed someone that they don't have to chase validation. Your care proved that loyalty can be fulfilling, not suffocating. And because of that, someone is choosing to stay. Someone is choosing to protect what they have. Someone is choosing faithfulness, not because they have to, but because, through you, it finally felt worth it, and that choice keeps unfolding in quiet, unseen ways. It shows up when boredom tries to masquerade as dissatisfaction. When routine threatens to dull the edges of affection. When the mind starts whispering that maybe love should always feel electric, effortless, endlessly new. In those moments, they remember something deeper than excitement. They remember substance. They remember how you showed them that love isn't sustained by constant highs, but by intentional care during the lows. They remember that real connection has seasons. That there are times when laughter flows easily and times when silence carries more weight than words. You never made them feel guilty for those quieter seasons. You didn't panic when things slowed down. You understood that intimacy matures, that it softens and deepens rather than constantly burning bright. That understanding now lives inside them, steadying their expectations, grounding their choices. Because of you, they no longer confuse attention with affection. They no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. They've learned that someone can desire them loudly and still not love them well. You showed them that love is proven not in how much someone wants you in a moment, but in how much they protect you over time. That lesson reshaped their values in ways no lecture ever could. When conflict arises, and it always does, they don't run at the first sign of discomfort. They don't disappear, shut down, or search for someone easier. They stay present. They speak honestly. They listen, even when it's uncomfortable. Somewhere along the way, you taught them that love doesn't end where difficulty begins. That commitment isn't the absence of conflict, but the decision to face it together. You gave them a new definition of strength. Not dominance. Not control. Not emotional distance disguised as independence. But steadiness. Accountability. The courage to be gentle in a harsh world. The courage to stay open when closing off would feel safer. That strength became something they now try to embody, for their partner, and for themselves. They've learned to guard what matters. To set boundaries not out of fear, but out of respect. To understand that faithfulness is not just about what you don't do, but about what you actively choose every day. Choosing transparency. Choosing effort. Choosing empathy when misunderstanding would be easier. How you never made love feel like a performance. You didn't require them to be impressive to be worthy. You didn't threaten abandonment to secure obedience. You didn't manipulate affection to gain control. Sometimes they think about. You offered something rare, emotional safety. And once someone has tasted that, they are far less willing to trade it for fleeting excitement. Because of you, they've learned that loyalty begins in the mind long before it's tested in action. It's in the stories we tell ourselves, the comparisons we refuse to make, the fantasies we don't entertain. You taught them, simply by example, that protecting love starts with protecting intention. They've also learned that faithfulness includes choosing yourself wisely. That staying loyal doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or shrinking your needs. You showed them that real commitment leaves room for individuality, growth, and voice. That two people can be deeply connected without losing themselves. That balance now shapes how they love, how they stay, how they give. There are moments when they catch themselves repeating something you once said, or responding the way you once did, with patience, with clarity, with care. And in those moments, your influence becomes unmistakable. You are no longer just a memory, you are a framework. A reference point for what love can be when it is healthy and intentional. Even if life has taken you in different directions, even if your paths no longer cross, the imprint remains. You were a turning point. A reminder that faithfulness is not naive, and commitment is not weakness. You showed them that loving deeply is not something to be embarrassed by, but something to be protected, and so, when the world continues to glorify detachment, they quietly choose devotion. When others chase endless options, they choose depth. When leaving would be easier, they choose to stay and grow. Not out of obligation, but out of understanding, because once you've known a love that feels safe, sincere, and steady, anything less feels hollow, and that is your legacy, not the grand moments. Not the dramatic declarations, but the quiet transformation of someone who now knows that faithfulness is not about limitation, it's about meaning, and because of you, they choose it still. And even that choice continues to deepen, long after the initial reason fades into something quieter and more powerful. It becomes instinct. A way of moving through the world with intention instead of impulse. They no longer feel the need to test every door just to prove they can open it. They've learned that some doors are meant to stay closed, not because what's on the other side is forbidden, but because what they already have is worth protecting. You taught them that discernment is not deprivation, it's maturity. They start to notice how rare it is to feel emotionally at home with someone. How uncommon it is to be accepted without being reshaped, to be challenged without being diminished. And once that realization settles in, faithfulness stops feeling like a rule and starts feeling like gratitude. Gratitude for depth. Gratitude for familiarity. Gratitude for the way love grows roots when it's given time. They've also learned that staying loyal means staying curious. About the person they love. About the bond they're building. You showed them that commitment doesn't mean assuming you already know everything. It means continuing to ask, to learn, to notice the subtle changes. It means choosing presence over autopilot. That lesson keeps their love alive in ways surface-level attraction never could. There are moments when they catch themselves defending commitment, not loudly, not defensively, but calmly. When others speak cynically about love, about monogamy, about staying, they don't argue. They simply don't agree. Because they've experienced something that can't be dismissed with sarcasm. They've lived the difference between empty freedom and meaningful connection. And that experience traces back to you. Because of you, they understand that faithfulness is also an act of self-respect. It's the decision not to fracture yourself into versions that exist only to be desired. It's the refusal to dilute your energy chasing validation that never truly satisfies. You showed them that wholeness is more attractive than availability, and peace is more valuable than applause. They've learned that real love doesn't beg for loyalty, it inspires it. You never demanded exclusivity as proof of worth. You simply lived in a way that made staying feel natural. That kind of influence doesn't fade. It becomes a quiet compass, guiding decisions even when no one is watching. Sometimes, late at night or in unguarded moments, they think about how different they might have been if they hadn't known you. More restless. More guarded. More convinced that love is temporary and people are replaceable. But knowing you interrupted that narrative. You made them pause long enough to see another way of living, another way of loving, and so, when they choose faithfulness now, it's not rooted in fear of loss. It's rooted in clarity. They know what shallow connection feels like. They know how loud attention can be and how empty it leaves you. And they know how quiet, steady love can carry you through seasons that excitement alone never could. You changed the way they measure fulfillment. They no longer ask, "How much can I get?" but "What can I grow?" They no longer chase sparks that burn out quickly. They invest in flames that warm slowly and last. That shift, subtle but profound, began with you, even if your role in their life was brief, even if timing kept you from becoming the forever you might have been, your presence mattered. You were not a detour. You were a lesson. A necessary chapter that reshaped the story going forward. Some people are meant to stay, others are meant to teach. You did both, and so, somewhere, in small daily choices, your influence continues. In the way they protect trust. In the way they honor their partner. In the way they don't entertain what could unravel something good. Your love echoes forward, not as nostalgia, but as wisdom. Faithfulness, for them, is no longer an obligation handed down by tradition or expectation. It is a conscious, grounded decision. One that feels aligned. One that feels strong. One that feels true, and all of it traces back to the moment you made love feel safe enough, deep enough, and real enough to stay for. That is how impact works. Quiet. Lasting. Unmistakable, and somewhere, without even realizing it, someone is still choosing faithfulness, because once you showed them that it could feel like home, and eventually, even the memory of you softens into something larger than a single person. It becomes a principle. A way of loving that no longer depends on who is standing in front of them, but on who they have decided to be. Faithfulness turns into an identity rather than a reaction. They don't stay loyal only because someone deserves it. They stay loyal because integrity now matters more than impulse. Because peace matters more than ego. Because they've learned that how you love shapes who you become, they stop romanticizing what could ruin something good. They no longer flirt with destruction just to feel alive. They've seen what happens when connection is treated as disposable. When hearts are handled carelessly. And they choose differently now. Quietly. Consistently. With intention, there's a calm that settles into their life because of this. Not the kind that feels dull or resigned, but the kind that feels grounded. The kind that allows joy to arrive without anxiety, closeness without fear, future plans without the constant expectation of loss. You showed them that love doesn't always announce itself loudly, sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it simply stays. They've learned that faithfulness is also about forgiveness. About grace. About understanding that people are imperfect and love is a practice, not a performance. Because you didn't give up at the first sign of flaw. They learned not to demand perfection, only sincerity and effort. That lesson alone saved them from repeating old cycles. In moments of temptation now, there is no dramatic inner battle. Just a quiet remembering of what matters. A knowing that some things are not worth trading. That momentary excitement cannot compare to long-term connection. That fleeting desire fades, but character remains, and on days when love feels heavy, when effort is required, when choosing each other feels less romantic and more deliberate, they still choose it. Not because it's easy, but because it's meaningful. Because they understand that depth is built through repetition, through showing up even when the feeling fluctuates. You taught them that, they carry that lesson into everything. Into friendships. Into family. Into how they treat themselves. They are more patient now. More honest. Less reactive. Love has slowed them down in the best way. And at the root of that change is the experience of being loved without games, without conditions, without fear. You may never know how far this reaches. How many decisions are influenced by the way you once cared? How many moments of restraint, honesty, and courage trace back to the standard you set? Impact doesn't always come with closure or acknowledgement. Sometimes it simply continues, quietly improving lives you'll never see again, and that's okay, because real love isn't measured by permanence alone. It's measured by transformation, by what remains after people part ways, by the way someone loves differently because they once felt safe with you. So even now, even in your absence, faithfulness lives on, not as a memory of you, but as a value shaped by you. A value someone chooses daily, freely, willingly, with understanding, and that is the truest kind of legacy, not being the one who was loved forever, but being the one who taught someone how to love well, because somewhere, someone is still choosing faithfulness, and they always will, because once, through you, it felt worth it.